everyone, and for those of you watching by the airwaves, welcome to you all too. We're going to continue our story of Ravenna. As you remember from last week, we covered pretty well up to Ravenna. This is a history of Ravenna. Actually, Ravenna had a little bit of a history before Ravenna was Ravenna, if that makes sense. We'll get into that in a few minutes, a little bit more in detail. But we did talk in detail about the two railroads that impacted Ravenna the most. The Lexington and Eastern, which was also the Kentucky Union, reorganized as the L&E, neither of which was very profitable. Probably the Kentucky Union until the lumber mill ran out of lumber at Clay City, and from then on it was sort of downhill. They tapped into the coal a little bit. They did make it to Jackson. This is 1910, this juncture. The line was built, completed about 1892. So that was about 8 years before the railroad, the Riney B, and then later the L&A, because the Riney B was not profitable, nor was the L&A when it came on. But they didn't reach Irvin until 1900. So the L&E was actually 8 years earlier and going toward Jackson. So this was the situation, and Ravenna had not been located or named, so it was, of course, by Irvin as it is today, and that was sort of the railroad area railroads in 1910. So Ravenna is getting ready. Within 5 years, things will come in place. The one big thing that's missing from this is what was known by the L&N, and we'll jump ahead a little bit, and we're going to back this a little bit, was the North Fork Extension, which was started in 1910 by the L&N, finished in 1912. 101 miles from Jackson, actually Dumont, which is about 2 miles south of Jackson, pretty close to the big sawmill there at Quicksand, but they did not tunnel through the hill. They ran out of money. And it followed the North Fork through Hazard, Whitesburg, and on up to McRoberts. And in all probability, that is the biggest construction project ever in eastern Kentucky, because they were building a railroad through an area that was almost like a jungle without the rain, that had never been penetrated by anything other than the crudest of roads, and narrow and hilly and steep. And just to get the materials in and to coordinate, they had to build it as they went in. That's the only way you could get anything in, by road at that time, the roads. And we'll get back to this a little bit later, but that was quite a feat for the Kentucky River Valley, believe me. Now let's skip 2 years here. 1912. Okay, here's what has happened in the interim. The L&N has purchased the L&A from Versailles to Beattyville, and they've extended it on down to Frankfort. So that's a little bit better. At least they've got an outlet now, up through Irvin to Beattyville. And that was purchased in 1900, let's see, that was purchased, let me think here just a minute. 1909. Then, believe it or not, a year later, in 1910, they purchased the L&E all the way. 1 year later. But, supposedly, the L&E did the North Fork extension. And they did not advertise that the L&N owned the L&E. The first depot sign at Hazard has L&E Railroad, Hazard, Kentucky. Now here's the reason for that. These were sort of competing railroads. Now there certainly wasn't enough business up here for one railroad, much less two. But from the Public Service Commission, the Railroad Commission, and all of that, that would have been buying out the competition, which is strictly prohibited. So somehow they kept that quiet. Now, I don't know for sure. There's some experts probably on those two railroads in the legal area that could go in. So they waited until 1915 before they actually completely integrated the L&E. The L&E was already integrated. But one of the reasons they did that had to do somewhat with public opinion. When they built this North Fork extension, in that period of time now, from the early 1900s, they actually bought it, 1910, 10 and 11, as they built it, 11 and 12 as they built this, and then completed it on up to Mac Roberts. This was built to mainline standards. It still is today. Some of the rail up in that forward reaches, a lot of this is gone, but it's not as big as some places. But still, they built it to mainline. During the intervening years from 1909 and 10 on up to 15, they also rebuilt the line from Urban to Beatable. They rebuilt from Beatable to Jackson, actually a new line here for a little ways. They improved the line on down to Urban and began constructing a brand new premier line to Winchester at a 0.42% grade, continuous. And, they follow the river here for about 4 miles, and then the other 22 miles is overland to Winchester to give direct access. These railroads were built to very, very low standards, okay? So by that time, the Public Service Commission said, yes, this railroad is going to serve this area. The coal business is one of the greatest economic features of this whole area it's ever been, and they're building a railroad that'll bring it out. And it did. I mean, they didn't have any trouble. They could carry the heaviest locomotives, as long a trains as they wanted, as heavy a cars loaded, whatever they wanted. And they got over to their main line here, whether it went north to Cincinnati, west to Louisville, or down to Corbin. It would go. So this could be a very profitable line, and they had the bridges strong enough and the track to withstand it. So apparently there was very little complaint about it, okay? And there really shouldn't have been. But that's really what happened there. So that's the reason. Now, the question, why was Ravenna picked? Okay, we'll try to answer that here. There's several reasons for that. And this is information I borrowed from readings and so forth, but this is basically it. Back in those days, the coal was worked in small quantities, 4 or 5 cars at a time from a load-out facility, 5 or 6 cars, 1 or 2 cars. They all had the railroad out of Hazard, out of Neon, would have mine runs. They'll bring those in, consolidate them, put them on a train, and then send them out. Well, somewhere they've got to be separated as to where they go. What the ultimate, do they go south, do they go north, do they go west to Louisville, whatever. And you have to have some space to do it, but Neon and Hazard, that was their primary responsibilities, was at least get them in some order in some trains and get them out of here, because we've got others to bring in tomorrow. You know, they didn't have the room. You know how narrow the valleys are up there. But here in Ravenna, things were different. Reasonably level here, and you can read that, readily available for a terminal. They could get it at a very reasonable price. It was really cow pastures, cattle farms, above a flood stage for the most part, and it was adjacent to an established town, county seat. And it was also adjacent to an existing rail line from Bateville. And there was already a station here that had a siding on it, 1 mile east of Irvin, which was known then as Cow Creek Siding. Okay? So, we've got a couple of things going for us here. Did I go backwards? Oh, I got it upside down. That's good. Okay. There was ample space to develop a new town, sort of on the hillside a little bit, but still reasonably level, for the employees to have houses. We had plenty of water here, and they were damming at the time. The land had been bought for the lock and dam here, Lock Plet. It's about 8 1/3 acres, and I'll show you that here in just a minute. That they did not have upriver either. Sometimes during the year, but not all the time. And there was no locks, of course. So we had plenty of water here. When I was young, this was the reason primarily why Ravenna was chosen. Well, it was one of many reasons, okay? The distances were roughly equal to Hazard, the Coursing, which is north, that was the yard south of Cincinnati, Corbin, and Louisville. And at that time, the cars had to be inspected every 100 miles, plus or minus. So it was midpoint, about 100 miles to Hazard by rail, and to here, maybe a little over, and then roughly 100 miles the other ways. So then they'd be inspected again at Coursey, at Louisville, or at Corbin, you see, depending on which way they went. So it was right in the center. Now that worked for their advantage early. Now later on, that's not the case. These mileages were compatible with the train crew runs. 100 miles is a day, right? Or a little over. And so forth. And to inspect them. So here they could take all these cars that came in, resort them into trains that went north, west to Louisville. They'd still consider that north too, or south to Corbin. Whereas up at Neon and Hazard, the other two yards that they had, there were some other little ones. They didn't have to mess with that. All they could do was assemble from the mines, okay, and get them out, because they would fill up their space. So that was a big advantage. They probably considered Winchester, but where this line came into the Winchester line at Patio, which is the name part of Winchester, that's on a hill actually. I remember a few years ago, a car or two got loose, rolled all the way down at 0.42% grade, all the way into Ravenna, and it, that's the way it was. So this was just not desirable for that, and so those are basically the reason Ravenna was chosen. Several reasons, and there. These are some of the original owners of the land that the yard and the city of Ravenna and part of Urban. This is the, in 1906, the government purchased about 8.5 acres for the locks and dams, both sides of the road. And those are some of the people. And I don't quite understand, all this was by Robert Friend, but he was a county official or something, and it's back in those days it passed through somehow, but really he didn't buy all of it as such, but that's the way it happened. So the can you dim those a little bit or not? If that doesn't hurt the picture. Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. So, like I said, the L&N essentially rebuilt the railroad up through here because they knew that the money would be well spent in the future to do that. So these are several of the things that they did at Maloney Junction or St. Helens, whatever you want to call it. They actually changed there and went up the Middle Fork a little ways and then crossed over to Toledo and then followed the old road from Toledo. Kentucky 52 from St. Helens to Toledo basically follows that old road there. And then from Toledo, they, if you know where to look up through there, you can see if the highway's going along to the railroad, you could see way up portals to tunnels that were way up higher at more grades. And later, when they rebuilt it here, they built longer tunnels without as much elevation, so it would reduce the grade of the line. And this was the yard here at Urban and the terminal, the roundhouse, a little bit year or two later before they completed it, and the turntable, and the classification yard, the south yard. And then the big thing here was building this Manchester to Urban line to patio for here. So those were some of the happenings that went on from 1912 to 16. And this was a problem. Prior to getting this built, it came just 2 or 3 years later, coal trains, even though they had very good track up here, and they worked on this, most of those would go down the old L&E through Natural Bridge and Stanton and Clay City. Much shorter trains, lighter locomotives, everything. They did spend some money on it, knowing they wouldn't get very many years use out of it. Very little of coal ever came this route, because most of the coal then went north, and if you brought it along through Ravenna and took it over to Richmond, then you had another crossing of the Kentucky River here, down and up, because most, like I say, most of that coal was going north back in those days. Now that all changed around 1950s and 60s, as steam coal to the south became the prominent type of coal mined up here. So that changed. So things changed really quickly once the L&N, that first 6, 7 years there. Things were really, that was booming times even in Ravenna. And I've heard that people, before they got very many houses in Ravenna, that people would rent part of their front porches to the workers to sleep. They had those wraparound porches, you know, and that was part of it. But at any rate, But when did Ravenna become Ravenna? That's our next question. And I looked through annual reports of the L&N's list of stations and timetables to do this. And I believe we've got it narrowed down into about 3 months, a 3-month period. 1915, the L&N's annual report still refers to the yard at Irving that they're building. Have been under construction quite a while. The annual report for the year ending in 16 does refer to Ravenna. The new line, patio or Winchester to Ravenna, these are direct quotes. 26.64 miles was not completed and placed in full operation until May 14th, 1916. Now, they were using it prior to that, because they started on that around 13. But they kept, and I read in the annual reports, they kept having problems with the old blue clay. That's what they call it, slipping and sliding. And they'd have to close it for a while. Then trains have to go down through power company, stuff like that. So it was a while before that was substantially fixed to do that. So here we could say sometime during late 15, early 16. It's a little earlier than 16. List of stations, April 13. Milepost, West Irving, Cow Creek. That was where Ravenna would be. 380 foot long siding. And then this didn't project properly. 144 is Wagers, Cow Creek's up here. 144 is Wagers, which is just across the Billis Creek Bridge. However, the March 1916 has, where are we here? Where are we? This thing is really bad. I don't understand why that is. Well, at any rate, they had Ravenna with a 26 foot long siding. Then Wagers in Miller Street, West Irving, of course, that was on the old L&A. This was part of the L&A. And then Ravenna was first mentioned, okay, March 16th. For some reason I didn't copy correctly. And this is a 15 timetable. Now this is out of the L&N timetables. It's the L&A subdivision. And you'll see what we've got here: West Irving, Rice Station, West Irving, Miller Street, Ravenna sketch. See, now this is in May 15. Now here's November 15 that year. Big change: West Irving, Ravenna, Price, and Overland. So before November 1st it was. So this previous one was May. So sometime around the middle of 15, and there was an article in the L&N magazine, I read it somewhere else, that denotes this. That's when Ravenna was actually named. So that's 1950. So I sort of consider, now Ravenna was just starting to be built, the town. There's no question about that. But the railroad name was Ravenna, and there's some questions as to where that name came from. I think the one that probably is given the most authority is the fact that it was named for Ravenna, Italy, which was where maybe 50, I think they had 40 or 50 Italian stonemasons that worked on the yard. Another one says it had something to do with Ravenna, that it was built between two hills. Well, it really wasn't. There was sort of a gap in the hills behind it, but and then the other one is Ravenna, Ohio, and I think that was formed after or something, so I don't know. But at any rate, I believe it's those workers. Now, the railroad had a little bit of a problem. They could not develop real estate. So they formed a separate entity to take care of that. And we'll get into that here in just a second. Here's a couple of the buildings, a real early building here. It's a restaurant. And two doctors, J.G. Lynch, who was a pharmacist, basically, right? I believe that's the one. And E.S. Kaywood, I know he was a dentist, and his son was a dentist who used to work up there. And Sam Case, and so-and-so. And that was the Christian church, which was a very early church here. We'll get into churches later, too. So what they did, they formed the Ravenna Realty Company. I see it was not formed until December 15th. And the people who developed that developed the town, purchased this land, the farms for the town, which are up on the hill a little bit. And all of them were really connected somehow to the railroad industry. It's a holding company, and see, it wasn't developed until 15. So everything's coming together. They named the town that the railroad has as their station, and then the Ravenna Realty Company is formed with the name Ravenna. All right, so it's not much question. That's an early picture. You all recognize that. Of course, this was later. This is after they built the depot and everything. And the office building, and the division is the EK division, Eastern Kentucky Division, and first post office. I'm not sure where that was, but I'd say it was along here somewhere, Oak Street. That was called Oak Street. They renamed it Main Street later. And these are the two deeds in particular. They conveyed this to the L&N, to the realty company, and also they also conveyed and dedicated the streets and alleys for public use. You know, that was part of what they did, part of their land, and all this is recorded. You can read that in detail down at the, and I just throw in a few pictures here. I think this was McLemore's, if I'm not mistaken. You can see some of the houses up here in construction. Hatfield's. This house should show up there. It doesn't. Yeah, here it is. I think that's in the bend down there. You come along Main Street, and you have to make a 90, another 90 to go down, connect with Broadway. I think that house may still be there. I'm not sure. I mean, look at that. But these are pretty authentic. So, assuming Ravenna was established in mid-1950, from all indication, in 1920, now some people say, well, Ravenna began in 1920. Well, in my opinion, it's 15. But whichever way you want to look at it. Submitted these to the state. And some of these people are, you know, original Ravennaites or whatever. And 24, the population. Now the population in 10, probably, maybe almost 15, it started growing. But in 10, that had grown probably zero. Just ever so many hundred cattle maybe. But other than that, it's 1245. So it went up pretty fast in 5th class. And then Park Sandfield was one of the original mayors. And the article in the Realty Company, again, November 1950. And the original plat of the city was in 1915. You know, the cards are sort of stacked over relative to that year, I think. And there was a revised plat. These are just some fairly early pictures. Now, these have been bricked, and this fellow over here was quite well known, C.E. Yeager. He supposedly named the Boy Scout Troop 144 because Ravenna was milepost 144. That makes sense. It used to be just past the depot, I think, there. I think. This was the original plat. Now, later plat also included some streets down here. These were never built, obviously. That's a floodplain. Here's 3rd Street. The original wagon road, I believe I covered this last week. This is the connection down to Broadway. Of course, now you have to, but it obviously went up this way, and this is called the County Road, also related. And, you know, the school is located right in here. But they named them all, and here was Oak Street. I don't know when that was changed, and that was it. You can see road heading up Alexander's property up there, and of course these were the oil tanks. The oil boom had already happened here, and then the railroad moved right in and began all this construction. So Ravenna in the 19-teens, anytime after 1900 certainly, but particularly in the teens and 20s, 30s, 40s, it was a booming town. 24 hours a day, 4 meals a day for the crews at night. You know, it was like their lunch. So that's the way it was. And then later on they added Daniel's Addition up here and the Deathridge Addition up Cow Creek Road here. The National Guard was added. So that's part of the benefit. But where did it end? Right here, the yards were not in it. They were not part of the town. But the railroad, as I understand it, always paid the school. I don't believe it paid the city anything, but they paid the school system. That was strange. But I'm pretty sure that's the way it was. They didn't have to pay the school tax because their yards and actually, I guess I drew this red line in. I think probably more like this. That was it. Maybe the main line was in. I don't know. But at any rate, that's interesting how that all developed. So just to recap this a little bit, this is from last. Talked about this a little bit. This was sort of the timeline for the Ravenna yards. Now this is not the town, but the yards. We're in this phase right here, very rapid growth. 1920, it continued to grow some. First World War had a big influence here. That prompted the building of the North Yard, which basically doubled the yard tracks, pretty much. Slow growth, fairly stable, and then on the tail end, just before 1950, it began to decline. We're going to talk about that here next. 50 to 70, rapid decline. Moderate decline. They had a little bump here, you know, with the Arab embargo, had a big effect on the coal market. And they couldn't handle it. So in 1980, we started rebuilding a lot of the track, rebuilt the yard, lined it up for unit trains, which was much more efficient. And then I think it basically closed, I believe, in 2000 for all practical purposes. They may have run a few trains after 2000, but the fuel, diesel fuel was trucked in. The crews were brought out to taxi, and crew stepped off. Crew stepped on the new crew, and they refueled, and they were out of here. So, essentially, the Ravenna yard and terminal and all was not existent. And then finally, essentially a minimal activity now, hardly any, except, I guess, inspecting the track. That's about it. So, and I just have a few pictures in here I wanted to show. A lot of people, I think this was probably torn down before this.
Is this a freight depot?
Freight, yeah. But this was a big operation at one time. And of course the tornado and the bridge were taken down in the 1961 tornado in June. And just a few more. This was, of course, steam locomotives required a lot of maintenance and activity, filling with coal, filling with water, filling with sand, and all of that. This was the yard house, which the yard office, which a lot of people have forgotten about. That was a frame building down here. And it was located in between the south yard and the north yard, right out where the action was, so to speak. And later, that was consolidated into the depot and then over to the storehouse. It's there today. And this is an early one. It's back when they were bringing oil out of Lee County and Weston County, going north. And a lot of block coal. You don't see that anymore. And the smaller cars, of course, but it's a nice picture. And this is what they call the shack for the trackmen and people working on the repair track and so forth. And this was the stores building, which is still there today. That's it. And this is the wash house. You could go from the second floor, there's the walkway, go from there to there. And you see the big water tank there. And that was the operation. So this is what you see today. It's been modified some now by the Kentucky Steam Group, which is current. It's not history, it's current. But basically, it's the only building, original building. Here's where the walkway went from here to that secondary building here. That's a pretty nice building too. That was the washer. And a lot of those workers, particularly if they worked on the shop track and whatnot, at the end of the day, they had to clean up before they even got in their vehicle. Cold, soot, grime, terrible. And now this, somebody asked me about Hackler's store. I believe that's what that was down there, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember who asked me that. But that sits down there by its lonesome. I don't know, your guess is good as mine. I just believe it might have been. And the L&N magazine, I think there were 600 and something published between 1925 or something and 82. But a lot of information from that. And it featured, they had some very good correspondence here in Ravenna that submitted articles and put them in. Ravenna was a big operation. Have you ever seen that? But you can see some of the, if any of you had Mossy Ghoul or not, so I know she was a teacher early. There's a lot of them on there, but all these are in the Ravenna Links. That was the first name of that. The golf course that the L&N built, and apparently it was a thriving place over there for many, many years. And that is an early picture of that. Now here we have two pictures. W.T. Collinson. Now later, here they had a plant. They mixed concrete on site. The roads and all just were not compatible to mixing it and bringing out 10 cubic yards at a time. Not a bridge in the state would haul that. But at any rate, a hamlet. So this was their plant. It must be pretty close to the greenhouse. And you look right back up there, and that is the, I believe that's the Baptist church. Look like behind there. I believe this is 3rd Street, and went up there and curved. And they're mixing it actually up the road up the mountain. And then this is the picture that we have. It, I had that scan on black and white in my head, so it doesn't have the brown cast with that one, but it may have just transmitted this way. I think it's an exact copy, isn't it? So that's Main Street. But Ravenna, very early on, within the 20s, we had concrete streets, I may have mentioned this last week, curb and gutters, storm sewers. I'm assuming they had sanitary sewer, they had water system, they had a phone system, and they had electric light system, and they had natural gas system. They had everything, I guess, that Lexington had. And they were way ahead of a lot of other towns in the state with all of those infrastructure improvements. They did a deal. And concrete streets. I've read where urban, they had commented that these streets were the urban, most of their streets were the oil, asphalt, old streets, whereas they had the concrete. But at any rate, that's part of it too. Just some of the people, can you imagine? Now this is the office force, the master mechanic, and here are all the employees, I guess just one trick probably, one session, or the shopmen all together. It's amazing how many people Ravenna employed, a number of 3 shifts a day.
Blaine Click put on here that was Williams Memorial Church.
That's what I thought. That's the Baptist church. That's right. Thanks. Yeah. So you asked me earlier when the streets were built. It'll be after the Williams Memorial. We'll get to that in a few minutes. Okay. And then we'll know. I just can't remember all the times. It's very difficult. And there's some of the steam engine crews. Now, for many years, the 2 passenger trains that were around a long, long time, from Lexington to Fleming, which is next to Mac Roberts there, they have a day train and a night train. And you can see you could leave Lexington at 11:40 in the morning, get up to Fleming at 10 o'clock. What is that? not, 11 hours, right, to do it. But by highway, you were lucky to get there quick. Time you fixed a couple of flat tires and a few other things. It was still better. I'll tell you one story. They also, people up around Hazard, Whitesburg, Jackson, and so forth, probably heard, like to take the day train, which left Fleming at 4 o'clock. Now, these were real football lovers. You can imagine, get up at the time to get on the train and ride that, picking up people all along. And they'd get in Lexington at 12 o'clock. Kentucky's football games were at night normally, within walking distance there. You can put that in the football stadium. So they'd go to a football game, and then they'd have all afternoon to fiddle around whatever they wanted to do. And they went to a night football game, and then they made their way back down to the station by 11:30 p.m. and they rode it back. And one of the conductors told me, and this passed away not long ago, he said that he had been a conductor on that run back in his early days. And he said what they would do, a lot of these guys would, have a little bit too much to drink. I mean, they had been almost a 24-hour deal, but at any rate. And he said, what would happen, a lot of these people were wanting to sleep some. And they'd run up and down through the coaches, keep them awake and all that. So he said they put an end to that. What they did, they would load all of those. I guess they sort of segregated them out. They'd load them all on the rear coach and lock the door. And that's the way they got them home without disturbing the rest of the people. So that's a typical railroad story. I mean, there's thousands, tens of thousands of stories. But that was told in all honesty and truth, I think. I just always thought that was sort of interesting. And this was a big concern. Now, the train stopped about 1956. It got down to 1. They dropped the night train sometime in the early 50s, I guess it was, maybe late 40s. And then they truncated it at Hazard for a while, the single one. It didn't go past Hazard. And then finally, in 56, I think it was, they completely eliminated any trains on the EK to Ravenna. And they did have a big excursion from Cincinnati a few months after that. And that's just a picture of that in Ravenna, of that. So I just thought I'd stick that in. Just some steam engine views. And a lot of pictures, a lot of people would retire, and the general steamed in from Civil War days, and they had that. A lot of big days at Ravenna on the railroad, and here's some employees. I knew several of those people. I'm sure some of you do. And then in 1961, the tornado came through and it finished off the roundhouse, and it dropped the bridge, across the walk bridge. The roadmaster told me that he had instructions to get a cost estimate on removing this and this anyway. It was going to go down. They were going to take it down. The storm did that in a few seconds. And damaged some coal cars and other things. So it was going to go. And this is just nice. I've always thought, this is after 1980 when they realigned. They had this south yard and they had the north yard up here. And they lined these and took out the intervening tracks so that they could drive down to inspect the trains later. And these were made primarily for the long unit trains. Much longer. They fit them all on that type of track. Southeast Coal Company came in about 1960, 59, 58, along in there, and built a preparation plant, as you may know, down at Cowell, just a little ways from Urban there, a couple miles. And but this is the view up in eastern Kentucky, which was a boost to Ravenna for several years. And they had to bring their trains down, and they would take out the shale and slate and all that, and then send out a pure, better quality, better grade coal. But they had about 3 different areas up there they mined, and it just wasn't profitable for them to set up 3 different prep plants. So they consolidated, brought it down here, and did it all at one plant. And that's was a problem up there for many years, with just finding enough area, flat area, to have the necessary processing equipment. Ravenna had it all. I just show this, this was interesting, I thought. These 4 young ladies, all railroad fathers or mothers or both, and they got together and practiced singing for a little while, and Mrs. Kaywood took them to the state fair, and they won first place. Of course, not a professional group, I don't reckon, but apparently they sang like they were a professional group to do that. And of course, Boy Scouts is always big here in Ravenna, and here we have one of the Eagle Scouts just passed away. His funeral was today from Ravenna. But okay, can we go to number the 3rd one? Okay, everybody got any questions during this brief interlude here? I'll try to. Or any comments or?
You said last time remnants of the roundhouse. Where's that at?
It's the county has that now, don't they?
Yeah, when you come up to drive up the hill,
Yeah.
if you get out and look between the driveway and the fence, the county road department, you can see the concrete, you see the imprint of the foundation, you still see the rails embedded in concrete.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's right at the end of the county's property, like you said. It goes over to the road, doesn't it? Okay, let's talk about some of the factors that initially and finally affected Ravenna Railroad's operations in Ravenna in the later years. And I said initially, there are people, the comment is, the Ravenna Railroad would like to have ridded itself of Ravenna long before they did. Now, that's one reason early on I indicated that Ravenna was located exactly where they needed it at the time. Because you got around 100 miles here, 100 miles here, plenty of water, plenty of flat land, reasonably inexpensive land, and on and on. You know, there's several things. But on the other hand, Ravenna was a big expense. Okay, everything they did here was expensive, like it is everywhere on the railroad. So, but it was a necessity when it happened, with the conditions and the type of trains they were running at that time. They had to have it. But now later on, and this begins about 1950, or the late 40s, those factors changed drastically, and they continue to change. Still are changing, okay? But at any rate, we'll get into a few of those. Here's some other early on factors. Hazard yard was established pretty early, and it was expanded. It's a fair-sized yard up there. And they could do, later they could do a good deal more of what they needed to do, and they didn't really need Ravenna. Okay? Now, the railroaders call those main trackers, and all they do is stop, change crews, and keep going. Now, that's before unit trains, but main trackers, so they didn't have to break them apart, recombine them, nor did they have to do the inspection, but that was after roller bearings came in. Talk about that. These were record times during the First World War. The United States actually took control of the railroads. Most of the histories you read on that say that they did, but it really was not a good experiment. They did not do it during the Second World War, if that tells you anything. But at any rate, they did. And then after the war, they gave the railroads back to the companies, okay? And supposedly in a little better shape than they were when they got them, you know, on and on. But anyway, the 1922 strike was a major happening here. It started more and more mediation and arbitration in labor disputes with the rank and file. The road people, shop workers, yard workers, you know, clerks, all railroad workers. They immediately knew from World War I that they had to have another yard here, and they built the North Yard, over 1,090 cars, a little bigger than the South, I think. Having a railroad along the river, most places, you've got these problems, and the railroad had their share. Now, down in this area, they were built up higher, it didn't really bother them, but up in Hazard, Whitesburg, and those areas up there is a different story. Of course, the 1920s, late 20s, the mid-30s, the Great Depression affected everybody, including jobs at Ravenna. And I've seen this figure 25 plus, of course that could be 50%, that's plus. I don't know, but at any rate, there were a lot of layoffs because they didn't have the trains to run. It just wasn't here. And finally in 32, they abandoned the LMA, which had been from urban to really Frankfurt, to Nicholasville, to Richmond, Nicholasville, for sales and on into Frankfurt. 42 L&E portion was abandoned, primarily for the war effort, and that's to get the steel. Then, in these 7 years or 8, Ravenna it had sort of dropped off a little, but man, it came back with vengeance. The work, the trains, the business, put on more people, all-time high. However, after that, the mighty M1s, if anything, the EK was known for, were the big M1 locomotives. And they made some improvements up in the EK during the Second World War, actually. And these weren't used very many years. By 1950, practically 51, 52, along in there, they pretty well abandoned steam. So they didn't get very many years out of those. Supposedly, the M1 was worth the purchase. And you could put one M1 on and carry a whole train, you know, just one. And you had to be pushed up big hills. But other than that, it only took one locomotive. And that was a big improvement. 49 to 55 was almost a complete conversion from steam to diesel. Now, it had started 10 years earlier, in the late 30s. But it was slow and mainly on passenger trains. There's where the main trackers began. They had to use the unit trains. Except unit trains all go to one location and they're done. But these main trackers were already lined to go to Corsi, Corbin, or Louisville. They did not have to have any intermediate, switching at the terminal. Then in 55 was the big strike, 58 days, the union workers. And I still have a baseball bat that my dad carried on the picket line. And that was to the extent of his protection, and he never had to use it, he said. That's what it was. Then in the 60s, they started doing some more work up at the Corsi. Now, this had a big effect on Ravenna, too, because now what had been done at Ravenna could be done somewhat in Hazard, and then the Corsi, that yard was almost doubled. And what they didn't do there, what they did in Ravenna, they could do it in the Corsi, consolidate into one big. And I can remember the men talking about this, what was happening. They knew what was gonna happen. Now, this was a big deal. It gave a boom here. And then 1960, Ravenna was demoted to a subdivision of the thing. Early 70s, big coal boom, Aram Pargo. So for a few years, Ravenna got a little boost. And then they shifted it to the Corbin division, and the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the railroads all over the country were having real problems with overregulation and a bunch of other stuff. And many went bankrupt, but the coal hauling railroads, which L&N was for many years was the main one. Norfolk Western was big, C&O, Chesapeake and Ohio was big. Those three. Later, some Western railroads became dominant in that, way out west. But those three were the three big ones. They had shortage of locomotives, they deferred maintenance on the track, bridges and track, over-regulation, all began to take the tolls. And it is very much considered that if the government hadn't gotten involved here in the 70s, 73, 76 were two big acts that were passed permitting the railroads to reorganize their operations, get rid of a lot of unprofitable tracks, routes, and passenger trains in 71s that gave them to the government, Amtrak. And those were really money losers for the railroad, particularly after they lost the mail service, the mail post office service. But they've gotten down to so few trains they couldn't get a very good service there, so even with the trucks. So now the government came in and Ravenna Yard was reconstructed. But that was sort of a death seal in one respect, because this then meant that from now on, basically going to have unit trains. They don't need to have anything done to them. In addition to that, a number of other advantages came into being in the 70s, 60s too. Went to roller bearings. Used to be every 100 miles, you had to look in the friction bearings, raise up the top, look in a little box to see if there was enough lubrication in there. If it wasn't, you had to put it in. But once they went to roller bearings, and then they put wayside detectors that would measure the heat of the wheel. Now, if you ran low on oil, then your journal or axle would heat up, and it'd pick it up. So, they didn't need those. That was technology, and computerization, and all this stuff. So then, of course, CSX was formed. For some reason, 1991, they opened a new car repair shop, used it for a few years, and that's the one that the steam group has today. And on and on. Finally, pretty well, just completely basically indefinitely now. All Eastern Kentucky trains, they were routed through a connection, which became the Rockhouse sub up there, which became the main line. And then approximately 2015, is that close?
18, I think.
Oh, 18, I was a little,
I'm not sure they came here then, they organized earlier in Lexington.
okay, I heard that talk,
Yeah.
whenever that was. But it took a while to get started, yeah, it's probably a little later than that for all practical portion.
If it was incorporated in Lexington, trying to
Yeah.
find a place.
So they located a portion of the Ravenna yard, purchased it. And, you know, that's the history of Ravenna today, basically, is that operation. Other than that, it'd be essentially completed. And so, like I say, this is the one, it's not a late picture, I should have substituted that with the late one. And they took out, shows them removing their long unit train tracks, and leaving about 4 or 5 over here, I think. 4. Main line and 3. So that's really all there is to it. And then, of course, they built that relatively new car repair facility, which is also an engine rebuild facility now for steam engines, which is specialized again. And so that okay. Why did Ravenna downsize and fire? Several reasons. And this is happening to many places in this country. Ravenna's not by themselves. Modern technological advances, mechanization and computerization. It's a lot of industries. Just don't need the people. Let the machines do it or the computer do it. You know, that's just the way things are. Dieselization, no telling how many people it take care of a steam engine, diesel, practically no one. Run themselves almost. Unit trains don't need near as much attention. More centralized traffic control, improved communications. Certainly don't need an operator every 5 miles or 10 miles. None of that, stuff like that. It might have cut one of those off, I don't know. Seal roller bearings, don't need to inspect the trains anymore. Wayside equipment, augmented. These go together. Instruments there to measure, if anything's dragging, it'll measure it. It's too hot. If it thumps too much with a flat wheel, it'll pick those up. All this stuff. Practically all track maintenance is mechanized today. We're actually working on some of that right now. There's a big timber and surfacing gang putting in cross ties and surfacing the track. You'll have about 40 pieces of equipment and maybe 30, well, you gotta have 40 operators, but then there may be 4 or 5 others on the ground. That's all you got. Everything else is done with the machine. And then the train device does about everything that the conductor and the rear flagman used to do in the caboose. And you can do that, monitor it. It'll tell you all about the brake pressure, and whether you're moving or not, vibrating and all that stuff. AEI readers do what the clerks used to do, and come out, record, you know, the conductor had to consist with the train, printed form, and hand over at the terminal. It would be regurgitated and remixed up, the new one would go out, and the conductor took care of the paperwork. That was his office. Now that's all done by the AE automatic indicators that come in and read the train as it comes in, they read it as it goes out. That's the history of the train. And these were enlarged, and so we're going to basically was needed. Of course, there's no longer division office that it lost in the 50s there. Southeast Coal closed, D connection was made, so that now trains can go out of the Kentucky River area over into the Big Sandy and then go north. Coal reserve, economics of mining coal, environmental aspects of coal, with people raise race came about, and so forth. A lot of factors affected Ravenna. Okay, we have two things left. A little bit about the schools and the churches, okay? And 7:15, now we've got about 20 more minutes.
You do.
Right, so we're in good shape. It all worked out pretty good. This is really self-explanatory. I'm not really gonna read much of this, but, and I do give credit to the people that, particularly on the churches. Ravenna did have a couple of previous schools. Best we can understand, the first one was 1916, they left from one room school. Then they had expanded to 1919. And these two were located pretty much in the front yard of the big brick school that everybody equates with Ravenna. And so this one was built in 26, I think it opened in 27. To 65, and then Ravenna Independent Schools folded into Esther County. Esther County enlarged it, the school, put addition on it, brought kids in from the eastern part of the county. By that time, Ravenna was having difficulty keeping a large enough number of students in the class. I graduated up there at 57, we had about 20, 21 or something. And that was probably average, so I'd say you had 120 times 8, so like about how many students we had. I mean, 20 times 8, 160 students in 8th grade. But at any rate, here's some early pictures, 1923, and this was their 4-room classroom, built in 19. This was the 8th grade graduating in 22. She was my 5th grade teacher, Audrey Renfro. She had a limp. And this was Scrivener, and that was the 4-room school. And here was the school. This was, Daniel's addition was added. And over here was the schools. These were the 2 wooden buildings. And then the public school was built right along here. That was the front yard. Later. Major Emma Stapleton was the teacher here. 26 and 27. 3rd grade. So things had picked up. Smokey Fortner, so a lot of Buddy Kaywood. Roy Cochran, I guess, probably Mrs. Cochran, taught 3rd grade.
Is that her name?
Jim was her name.
Yeah, I had Miss Cochran, yeah.
Yeah, she was good. Unusual to be named Jim, a woman, but that's what it was. She was good. So there's a lot of them in there. But at any rate, that was made up behind the school. And that's a typical 1929, 1930 4th grade. Guy Hatfield, believe it or not. He gave our graduation speech, 8th grade. His dad had a clothing store. And so, on and on. And this was brand new school. Must have some trees out here too. So that's pretty big. Maybe that was not an early picture. an interesting, I think it's in the book, the handouts, the programs for this, really, really good. 1934, everybody dressed up. Ravenna really, from everything you read, really or certainly early on, I think all the way through, a lot of attention and it took great pride in their school, no question about it. I remember the chair of the school board, she would come by periodically and visit all the grades, come in, the teacher would introduce them. She'd ask a few questions, all those things like that. And this was our, Mammoth Cave was always the 8th grade, leave real early in the morning down there, take the cave trip and all, come back in the same grade, same day. And, yeah, here I am. So that was a long day, but, it was, some of our, of course, I had these readily available, so I sort of overstocked on the 57-year class. But James Brackett, I think he just passed away not too long ago. He's apparently trying to get my attention. Here I am. He's trying to get my attention. Sort of interested in looking at these, later on. And here was a picture in 2014. I think they're doing some upgrading on this edition recently. But anyway, like I say, the school was a big center point. I think the 8th grade graduation activity every year was one of the highlights of the town and anything that the school did. All right, here is a little bit about the 5 churches of Ravenna. 3 were very early churches. 1 was a little later in starting, the Catholic Church, and then the Nazarene was much later. We were talking about the Baptist. See, it was built in 1923. So that picture was made after 23. We can tell you that much about it. And that makes sense. I don't think they could have got everything together quickly if the town only started in 15 or so to have gotten to that point by then. So, but I believe probably that church was probably building those streets. I've always thought probably in the mid-20s. For some reason I have that idea. And the first church generally is a Christian church, followed Church of God 21. Now, first of all, it was located up in Daniel's Addition, and then moved over on 3rd Street. No, yeah, 3rd. And then the Methodist Church shortly thereafter, and the Baptist Church in 23, and then Catholic Church 10 years later, and the Nazarene Church. It was in 1950. They built the basement and they added on top of it later. After the Church of God moved over on 3rd Street, it was destroyed by fire in 55. They built a new building very quickly on that street. It's been modified quite a bit. And of course, the Christian church was destroyed, the brick one, by the tornado in 61, and then a new building was soon built directly across, which is what's there today. So, 6 churches were reasonably sized for a town the size of Ravenna, and 5 of the 6 are still in existence, only one being the Methodist. don't know, this may have changed, didn't update that either. But we'll go through these a little bit, like I say, it's mainly reading. Good bit of this I got from, Charles Bennett, Janice House, or Bush, Janice Bush, most people know it. And they were my two sources here. It was a frame building, I've got a picture of it here, kind of up next. And then they built the brick church that the tornado destroyed in '61. And they built this, you may remember, and then they tore it down about 25 years later. This was the original church. And I mean, some of these pictures they show, I think, typical Sunday services, and there's a lot of people there, most all of these. Men's Bible, this is the men's Bible class. So, that was interesting. And here was the brick church. Some special occasion, everybody really dressed up, looking out the windows and everything. And there's what it looked like when it was destroyed by the tornado. And that was quite an unfortunate thing. Of course, there's the new. But there's a lot of history in the book. I just Williams Memorial. I actually Henry gave me quite a bit of information on his. But there'd been a book written in 1970, so that really helps. And someone told me first church was built up on Daniel's addition, and it was built on stilts almost, you know. And concern was that too many people sit on the downhill side. It might topple over, you know. So they decided to go over on 3rd Street and build a brick building on flat ground. So that was the end of the church in Daniel's addition, but that's where it started. And so that is it. So, and this, the Williams Memorial is M.E. Williams contributed. So it's called Williams Memorial Baptist Church. So that's what it is. 19, I don't see how they got all those people in there. Let's see, got a basement or something. It's not that big church, but it looked like. And 63 charter members started. All that's in there. Some early people there. Willard Webb was the mayor later. He also worked the railroad. Maybe him. Good. Tom Yancey, he was a detective on the railroad. Then Mr. Burns and Mr. Yancey. The EK, I guess, was their area. So that's 2014. Church of God, we talked about earlier, this 40 or 60 frame situated on brick pillars. You know, that's what I was saying. It was packed. And they decided to build a larger church in 44. And so that was one of the early preachers. I think he cut off the line. I don't remember his name. But I think this is the church up here. It's a 15-year, Muncie was one of the very early ones, that was a picture there. And that was 2014, I don't think it's changed much since then. And here's my sources on the Methodist Church. And it was a frame church, still is. I understand they finally constructed brick, but after that strike, they didn't know the members how it was gonna come out, and they decided to go with wood, and that's the reason it's wood. May be true, may not, but that's documented. And, they built that big addition on the back in the mid-1950s. And, a lot of these are people who, members of the, and, some of the stuff. Catholic Church, the first Catholic Church was actually up in Station Camp. There's quite a bit of history to that. I'll show you a little bit here. St. Paul Catholic Law Church. And a number of Catholic families settled up there. And picture here, it doesn't show up as well as it should. Here's some stones, that were the cornerstones of the church up there, and part of the church. And this is actually in the church on 5th Street, and that was an original bench from St. Paul's there in Washington. The Rice sisters lived up on Station Camp, little toward Red Lake. Had that, it was at their sale many years ago. And Phil and Brill bought it, kept it, it's put together with wooden pegs. And it's got about 4 different types of wood in it. Walnut, maple, and cherry, and something else. Purposely made that thing. Pretty nice. 1932, and it was new. And then they added on several years ago. 2000. Very good church. And then the last one is the Church of Nazarene. Organized in 1950. And then basement chapel, and that was the church for several years. That was it. Until, well, 4 years or so. And this is some of the history of the people that were there. And this picture of it going up. And probably looks that way today. I don't know. I made this in 2014 for that. In the last this series of cemeteries, most people say, well, there are no cemeteries in Ravenna. Well, there really are, too. And some of this came from the cemetery book that the Estill County Historical Society publishes course, this would be north of the river. These would be included in that book. And that's where I got most of my information. Well, here it is. I forgot that. And at any rate, I'll show you a couple of those pictures. Now, these are over there around this is up in Daniel's edition, up on the hill. And there's some, you know, and this is over in the railroad yard, on the back side toward the old road. And there's actually two over there. One, I believe, is for white, and another for the African.
People of color,
Okay.
that's polite way to say it.
And they, people of color, so, you know. So that's where they are. So at any rate, this is about the end, but paintings down there, I thought were a good way to sort of end this. And bridge is there no longer. The steam engine is there no longer. Coal cars are there no longer. The roundhouse you can see through there is there no longer. The office building, office, no, it's not there. Roundhouse, bridge,
That concrete thing at the end of that bridge there is still there.
it's still there.
Mhm.
Tornado did not knock it down. It's sort of hidden by vines, but it's there.
Yeah, it's got trees growing around it.
That's all slip, I guess. I don't think the other one's over there. I don't think it was. So that is basically, now this was how it looked in 2014. If I wanted to bring this up to the present, this is history, okay? Then that looks much different today. You see an amphitheater out here, you see a lot of activity around the Blue Building. You notice the old stores building has been spruced up on the outside. It's got a museum on the inside and some other stuff. And you don't see any of these trees here. That's all been renovated. So things have changed quite a bit. That's really not covered here. That's the way it is. So that's it. Anybody got any questions or comments or?
Jerry, why does CSX still maintain that line?
No
Why
one
don't they
knows
take
the
it
answer.
out?
No one knows the answer to that. That is a strange thing. They inspect it.
They have to until they decommission it, right?
I think so. And then to recommission after you decommission,
Yeah.
it's just like starting all over.
But
Six-
it's not passable right now, is it?
A couple of places are not. Now you can get to Winchester.
Winchester's still up.
There's a spot.
Where the mudslide took it out,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
severed it.
That's between Badel and Jackson.
No, that's just up outside of the road.
Right.
Oh, okay. I thought one of those was
But
open
up
a little
between
bit.
Jackson and Hazard, there was a big washout.
Washout.
If anybody's interested, when that classic diesel engine that they brought the steam engine in with, when it left here, they mounted a camera on the nose and they filmed it all the way from Ravenna to Winchester. So you can see that on YouTube.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
Do you think the trains will ever make a comeback with the price of gas and diesel?
I say that.
There's two ways that they might come back. One is if we, I don't think there's any danger of running out, but if we quit using any fossil fuels, unless they go to something else, I don't know, trains, if that's the only choice you've got, is to ride a train. You can't drive your automobile. That could change things 50 years from now or something. I don't know. You know, I mean, that's a possibility. The other thing is it could certainly be a tourist attraction. There's a lot of tourist trains in this country. If you search them out, they're 10 miles long, 5 miles long. maybe 20 miles long. There's quite a few of them. There's some a little bit longer than that. They're generally on lines that were used very little. These were rickety branch lines, and you hop along on jointed rail. You know, the rail about this tall rather than this tall. But the line up through here, as I pointed out earlier, this was built to mainline standards. You got continuously welded rail. It was well engineered. The bridges will carry anything you can put on them today. Still will. So if this ever becomes a tourist railroad, it will be a superior adventure for people. And you get to travel up the side of the river, you get to go up through some tunnels, and you cross over from the middle fork to the north fork, go through Elkatoy Tunnel, go upgrade all the way to Winchester. It goes through pretty close to the gorge and mountains, and the river can be developed alongside of it. There's 2 or 3 locks and dams up there, beautiful places right alongside the railroad.
Well, I know they took the tracks and stuff out of Powell County
Yeah.
because and now there's houses built in there with,
It'll never, but this one is in the best position.
well, I heard Powell County abused their line when it was through there. Especially the farmers. They'd throw their cows on there that had died and,
Yeah.
throw it on there and blame the train for
Yeah.
it, but.
And every time a train hit a cow, or a bull in particular, it was the best in the herd. You know, you'd be surprised how much it costs
Yeah.
to get that, to fix it. So, yeah, that's it. And that, I don't know about Powell County, but, it was not a money-making line, and the L&N existed with it for a while. It was a secondary. If their main line was blocked, they could still run some stuff down through there. And they provided pasture service for a number of years to the people. Had big excursions up to the Natural Bridge and all that stuff, Torrent. Then even the LNA, they ran tourist attractions up to the Escort Springs and all that. They tried to capitalize on that. But as the cars came around, people, they just migrated. And those branch lines were the first ones to leave, and then the main lines. The big long distance passenger trains, they stayed around a little longer, and then they pretty well evaporated. Still have a skeleton system throughout the country, but it's one time a day. You got one train a day each way, and you got to leave. Got to be able to leave at that appointed hour, or you don't go. So, but it's a very economical from a standpoint of energy usage, and I guess environmental concerns and whatnot. Train it's got a lot of, railroad transportation has a lot of positives, no question about it. And it built this country, as we talked about earlier, no question about it. Back in late 1800s, it was early 19, that was it. That's what built the country. With the transportation system that you gotta have, freight and passenger. So it served its purpose before there were alternatives, but alternatives have advantages. You go from Chicago to California, it's gonna take you 2 nights and 2 or 3 days. And you fly it in 4 hours or something. It's tough to compete, but as long as we have fuel and automobiles and airplanes, I don't know.
Jared, do you think that the Southeast Coal Company should be responsible for reclaiming the land out there where they made all that mess?
You would sort of think so, I guess.
That was
I mean,
pretty farmland out there.
yeah, I don't know when the reclamation laws, I just don't remember offhand, when they came into being. And if they apply to them. They may have been, much earlier than that. I don't know.
But it's just usually sand now.
Yeah. Yeah, they filled in a lot of hollers and stuff out there. It's
There's
supposed to,
probably a lot of controversy on who actually has the rights to own it.
who owns them.
Yeah. There's been a couple bankruptcies and whatever.
So you wouldn't have nobody sue them, huh?
And there's quite a bit of coal in those. They wanted to remine it, and I think they thought about doing that 2 or 3 times. A lot of tests run on it. But, I don't think that ever happened out there.
They moved some of it out, a couple different times, but it just, they didn't.
This doesn't prove economical, apparently.
But they left behind the big flood things where they put that old nasty water. And it gets over the road out there. Every time it rains, it gets over the road and then
Washes.
he can't get the car hearts.
Washes off.
Yeah.
Oh, they haven't opened the gate, I didn't go this year, they haven't opened the gates to the cemetery out there the last 2 years,
Well, that's not right.
so.
Yeah.
I didn't try this year.
They might have had it open this year. Just get you a big barrel of bolt cutters.
Well, I told the county judge and asked him about that, but they said because it's on private property, they don't.
Don't admit you done it. See?
I don't know if they got cameras watching or not.
I'm not gonna believe they done it.
Marlon Deal used to have a keeper out there, but since he moved to Richmond and Lopsac, I don't think they come up pretty much with it.
Somebody else needs the key then.
But they're still using, the county is using the cemetery at the railroad yard, right, to this day?
Yeah, someone was buried 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, they buried several of there, I think.
It's like a pauper cemetery.
Yeah.
Huh?
Pauper.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Since that's now on county property.
I wonder who owns that property.
I think it's under the county's jurisdiction, because the county workers actually have to do it.
Okay. I didn't know.
Yeah.
Learned something. Okay,
You did a good job.